Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. Tonight we have some alien encounters for you. All of these things began on the farm my family owned in South Texas. I was between 8 and 10 years old in the late 1980s and early 1990s. Due to my age at the time, I don't remember exactly when this started, but I do remember most of the details of the experience itself as clearly as I can today. I never knew anything about aliens, being taken by aliens or anything else like that. I'd seen sci-fi movies like Star Wars and E.T. But at the time, I didn't make any connection between what I saw and the strange creatures shown in such movies. I wasn't really interested in it. I didn't become interested in or learn much about aliens and UFOs until I was 12 or 13 years old, a few years later. Maybe it was what I went through that made me want to learn more. The farm is on 200 acres, and 3/4 of them are open fields. The other quarter is a mix of pasture and lightly wooded areas, and a small creek runs through the middle of the property. These areas are separated into paddocks by electric and barbed wire fences. On a small hill in the front north corner of the property, there is a row of 3 houses that go from east to west. Each house is next to the one next to it. The middle house is where I live with my immediate family. At the time, my uncle and great-grandparents were still alive. Respectfully, there are homes on both sides of my grandparents' house, which is at the end of the row leading to the rest of the property. At the end of the row, on another acre, there are a few barns and other buildings. In total, the residential part of the property is about 4 acres on that hill that looks out over the rest of the land. This will be important when I talk about directions and other things. I hadn't started school yet, so it was early August and late in the evening. The adults in my family at the time were older and went to bed right after 10 p.m., so they must have been after 11:45 or midnight. Newscast Central Time Zone. I usually went to bed at 9 o'clock. I would read books or watch TV with the brightness and sound turned down, so I would stay up much later. I wasn't sleeping, so this couldn't have been a dream or sleep paralysis. Another member of my family saw me awake in the house right after this happened. After I was sure the adults had gone to bed, I did it either way. I went to the kitchen to get a drink of water. As I stood at the kitchen sink, I looked out the window and saw a bright orange glow at the bottom of the hill to the southwest. We had a barn fire the year before, so I thought there might be another one. However, there was neither a cloud of smoke nor the smell of smoke, so I walked out of the kitchen and down the hallway to the back door. Before I ran around and woke everyone up, I went outside to see what was going on. I remember that when I came home, my dogs didn't run out from under the porch to greet me. They didn't even come out to follow me as I walked through the yard and into the backyard. It was too quiet. There were no sounds of the night like cicadas or crickets. I don't think I knew it at the time, but now that I look back, I can't forget it. I walked to the light at the back edge of our acre. I almost had to keep walking toward this strange thing. I jumped over the fence to get to my great-grandparents' yard. I went through the back fence at the top of the hill and pulled myself up to the top of the fence. I will never forget what I saw. At the bottom of the hill, where the creek runs through, you can set up a small egg-shaped craft. A large oval-shaped hatch in the front of the ship was open. The orange glow came from inside the ship, but the light got out and filled the ship and the area around it. Remember that the light was pulsing out in a corona, like when you have water in your eyes and look at a street light. The ship itself was a metallic silver color, but it wasn't shiny and didn't reflect any light like you might think it would. It was maybe 10 to 12 feet tall and maybe that wide at the bottom. At the rounded top of the egg, it got narrower until it was maybe 3 feet wide. It was held up about 6 inches off the ground by what I think was a tripod of metal legs, which for the life of me I remember coming straight out of the bottom of the ship, but not out of obvious ports like an airplane, and they were only about a foot long. I couldn't remember seeing any other lights outside. In hindsight, the only light was coming through the hatch. The ship itself looks like a drop pod or something from a science fiction movie. It doesn't look like something you would use for regular travel. As I sit there and watch, a small being about 3.5 feet tall, which I can see as a blacklit shadow in the doorway, leaves the craft and does something that looks to me like it's taking soil or plant samples. Then he turned around and went back into the house. From the top of the hill, I could see him do this a few times. It didn't seem to notice me. This is where I think things get a little strange. The creature looked like a Ewok at first, but it didn't have any clothes on. It was small and furry, and I was watching it from a distance. I stood on that fence and watched this thing do its job for about 2 minutes. I decided at some point to jump down and walk down the hill to get closer. I remember being more excited than scared because, in my young mind, this was like something I had seen on TV coming to life, and I was the only one there to see it. So I walked down the hill, and all of a sudden I noticed something over my right shoulder. It sounds like something is running up behind me from the other side of the fence. I turned around to look back, and as I did, I heard the crash of tin metal into the night. I quickly realized that something had just run through a hole in the fence by the gate that my uncle had filled with a sheet of tin metal. I see a blur rush past me, and I turn to follow it as it runs very quickly past me down the hill to the craft. The other being looked up the hill at me and then turned to run into the craft. As the other one got to him and started running down the hill to catch up with them, my memory kind of jumped and I was standing on the other side of the creek in front of the craft, staring at the open hatch. One of the things walks out. At this point, he looks like a furry creature that looks like a Ewok, but then this fuzzy shell falls off and he stands in front of me as a short grey. One thing I should say is that it didn't look exactly like how most pop culture and media show it. The head was big, but it wasn't in the shape of a teardrop. It was more like a human head, but a little bigger. It made me think of the Watcher from Marvel Comics, but it looked more like an oversized embryo head. The eyes were big and human-like, but they didn't have sharp points. Like in popular art, they looked like the eyes of a sugar glider at night, but they weren't all black. They just had very large pupils that were stretched out to let in as much light as possible. This is the best way I can think of to describe them, and I think it makes sense since they mostly work in the dark. It had small holes for eyes and a bump for a nose. It had a small mouth, but I couldn't see any teeth. It opened its mouth, but it wasn't going to say anything. Its body was small and thin, just like what you see in movies and TV shows. The only thing I can say is that they look very light and fragile, and their movements are very smooth and deliberate. They have long arms, long fingers, very thin legs, and small feet that are split in the middle like ninja shoes. It wore a tight, form-fitting suit that covered its whole body. The suit was made of a very dark grey or very dark navy material with a faint metallic shine, but it didn't absorb or reflect light. They had 5 fingers that were thin. The one outside the craft was wearing gloves, but the one inside the craft wasn't. They might have taken them off like the person outside. Later, they both wore military-style boots without laces, which again split like ninja shoes as the furry shape disappeared. It seemed interested in how I reacted to the fact that I could see it as it really was. I know now that it was probably listening to my thoughts and trying to look like this Ewok to trick me into thinking I made it up or give me a false sense of security so I wouldn't be scared. No matter what, I wasn't scared, and I even waved and said hello to it. When I spoke, the other being leaned back out of the hatch and looked at me, while the one on the ground smiled and looked back at his partner. They started making sounds that sounded like light chirping or clicking, and it seemed like they were talking briefly about how I could see their true forms. I wasn't going crazy and didn't know what to do with myself. The person inside the craft didn't seem very happy to see me. He looked a little scared when I showed up. And based on how fast he ran down that hill, I can't say that I blame him. In any case, he must have been persuaded by the person on the ground to let me stay for a while, because he basically just said, "Okay, whatever you say, just deal with it and don't say I didn't tell you." So if he starts to go crazy, when you think about it, it's kind of funny and shows how people are. So he walks up to me and says hello. I found out later that this was done through telepathy. But I didn't really notice at the time. Even though I spoke to him with my own voice, it was telepathy. But I could hear his voice in my head, and it sounded the same as if you or I were talking at the dinner table. It's hard to say what that means. So I hope it makes sense. I asked what they were doing out here. He told me that they were gathering information. I asked him where they were from, and he said they were from a long way away, but they were actually closer than we thought. He said that they go there often to check on things. He told me that they were there to do research. I asked him if he needed any help. He thought for a moment, then said, "Sure." He went back to the ship for a moment and then came back with a tube and a cylinder. He got on his knees and waved for me to come closer, so I did. He took the small metal tube and pressed the bottom sides together to make the end of the tube open like a bird's beak. He put some dirt from the ground in the tube and snapped it shut. Then he took the cylinder, and I saw that the top has some holes. He puts the tube into one of the holes, and it clicks into place. He pulls out another metal tube, opens the end, and hands it to me. I do what he did and try to close it, but I can't figure out how to do it from the sides. He seems to find this funny, so I gave it to him. He tells me that it only works for them, and then he snaps it shut and puts it in the cylinder. We do this a few more times, with me scooping up dirt and him closing the tubes and putting them in the holes, until the cylinder is full and he is putting things back in the craft. I start to look for something else I think he'd be curious about. I gave him a few stones with flint in them and told him they were my favorite kind. I pull up a couple of plants and tell them a little more about them. From what I knew, he seemed to be above it all. But since I was a child, he played along anyway. I tell him I'm good at catching frogs and crawfish in the creek and ask him if he wants one. He said that they don't take biological samples because that's not what they do. They were trying to find things. I should say at this point that where they landed was on top of a spot where my uncle had buried some of the burned out wood and scraps from the barn fire the year before. Over the years, people also buried old refrigerators and other metal things there. It looked like a small dump. The ground in that area was still mostly empty and had just been dug. I think that this is what might have led them to this place. Under the ground, there is a lot of metal. About 30 to 45 minutes went by while we were taking samples. When we were done, I asked if I could look inside, and he said I could, but there wasn't much to see. He told me that a much bigger ship was waiting for them up in the sky, and he pointed in that direction. He turned around and climbed into the ship. The other one stopped me from taking a step up. The first one told me to just look, but not to go all the way in or touch anything. I stuck my head in the doorway and twisted my neck to see as much as I could inside. The ship looked bigger on the inside than it did on the outside, but not by a lot. Of course. All of this depends on how big we are, and I was a child at the time. The walls were flat and white, just like the outside, which was shaped like an egg. I looked up and saw that the light was coming from the ceiling. Golden orange light was just shining brightly from the center of the round ceiling. It was blinding if I looked at it for too long, but the inside was much darker than the bright light outside would make you think. There was a kind of low, shallow shelf around the middle of the walls, and the sample canisters were in the recesses in the shelf. There were also cube-shaped containers that I think held bigger samples of things, but we never used them, so I'm not sure. The shelf stuck out, and there was a kind of control panel with two seats that looked like small bucket seats next to each other, each perched on a single pedestal. On the panel, there were no buttons, switches, or other controls. What's most interesting is that there were flat touchscreen panels, like the ones we use on tablets today. There were symbols and other things on the panel screens, but I couldn't for the life of me figure out how to copy them. Right above the control panel, there was a bit of a recess in the wall that was flatter than the rest of the wall but a little darker. This is a kind of deck or window that lets you look out of the boat. This window was a strip about 1 foot high and 3 feet wide. When the first person touched a screen, the window opened and I could see outside. From the outside of the ship, it didn't look like you could see it. I sort of said, "Wow." Then it snapped shut again. At this point, the first one tells me that it's time to go, that they've already taken too long, and that they'll probably get in trouble for letting me help them. I asked him if I could go with them. He told me they can't do that right now. He said it before, but they are not allowed to bring back any living things. Also, I wouldn't be able to stay alive for very long. And they had nothing for me to eat. I remember asking him what it means to be fed, and he told me that I couldn't eat anything. I told him I could go home and make something to eat. He said, "That's not enough food for me." I told him that I like pizza, and that we could get some together. They seemed to find it funny that I won't give up, but his partner looked annoyed, so he told me it wasn't possible, and that he would drive me home. The next thing I remember, we are both standing just inside the back door of my house in the hallway. The person or thing thanks me for my help and tells me I was a good helper. I asked him when he was going to come back for me. He said that I was too young right now and that if I waited a few years, they might come back being stubborn. I told him I wanted to go very much. He told me to wait and then to hurry up. He had to leave because people can't stay in our environment for too long. But when I asked him what he meant, he told me something about the weather and air, which I didn't understand at the time. Just being in my house seemed to make him very nervous. Then he went backwards and just left the house through the back door. I went back to my room by turning around. Just then, one of my uncles, who was staying with us at the time, opened the door to his room next to mine and asked me what I was doing up. I told him I was getting a drink of water and started telling him about helping this little boy I met in the backyard. He tells me with a groggy voice that I left the kitchen light on and that I should go back to bed. It's 3:30 a.m., and he slams his door shut and goes back to bed. I go to the kitchen to turn off the light, but there is no light because the glow from the craft is still coming in from outside. After a few seconds, The light goes out and I see a greenish-white bolt of light shoot up into the sky from below the hill. I turn around and go back to my room because it's getting dark again. I couldn't sleep the rest of the night, so I stayed awake until morning. I tried to tell my family what I had seen, but they didn't believe me. My uncle did tell me that he had seen me awake that night and that he thinks I went outside again. I would sometimes sneak out of the house to play with the dogs, look at the stars, and do other things. My parents just told me to stay inside because of the boogeyman or something like that. The usual advice from parents to not go outside late at night. My late grandmother was the only one in my family who ever believed me. She told me she had seen them before, but they were angels, she said. She was a very religious person, and toward the end of her life, she would talk about seeing angels. As I got older and had a few more experiences with these beings, she would always have a collection of angel trinkets. I would talk to her about them, but she always said they were angels. A lot of time is also spent going back to the landing site to look for clues. It left the area with this kind of charged air for a long time after the event. Most of the time, cows also avoided this area. My uncle put up a feeding pen near it for a while, but the cows wouldn't eat from it and the hay kept going bad, so he had to move it. A few years ago, he got a mule, and whenever he is in that paddock, he stands a good distance away from that patch of ground and looks in that direction. If you try to lead him to it or get him close to it, he will fight you and kick back. I didn't try that again because of that. This uncle hasn't heard me tell my story. Over the years, my cousin has also found a few mutilated cows and goats on the property, but never in this paddock. In fact, I've met a few people I'm sure were from another planet. I would not only learn more about them from books and other media, but also from the things themselves. As I said, if anyone has read this whole post and is interested in hearing more about my experience, let me know. I am now in the middle of my 30s. I don't live on the farm anymore, but I go back there often. Whenever I think about it, I go to that spot by the creek and look for signs that they are back. I also try to see if they have left anything behind so far. I only have the memories of what I've seen and heard. I'm still skeptical, but I believe more now. I'm very logical and down to earth. I don't like bullshit. I don't even like the idea of ghosts or aliens. I don't even watch movies or read books that are made up. Most of the time, I'll tell you what happens in the simplest, clearest way I can and let you decide. I don't care if you believe it or not, because I'm saying very clearly that I'm not sure if I should either. About a week ago, this took place. I had to take some time to think about all of this first. I tend to get anxious, so I had to wait a while before I could write anything. I was driving home from work at night, as I always do. It was about 11:45 p.m., which is a time when there aren't many people on the roads. I'm mostly just thinking to myself because it's a normal day and I'm just doing my usual things. When I see a red light, I always stop. Then I keep driving, and a moment later I'm at the same light I just went through. It was something I had heard about in the past. Some people think they just went back in time. But I didn't think much of it most of the time. Because I wasn't really paying attention, as I said, and maybe I just made it up. I just didn't care. Even now, I'm not sure if this part has anything to do with what happened next, and this is where things get interesting, even though I go to bed as usual. Before that, nothing at all happened. I get up at around 3 a.m., get a drink of water and then go back to bed. I think I fell asleep almost immediately after that, since it's usually easy to fall back asleep. It seems to happen almost right away when I fall asleep. I can only say that what happens is like a typical scene where someone wakes up on an alien spaceship, just to be clear. I don't have alien dreams. And I can say for sure that I've never even dreamed about aliens. Strange ship, yes, but no aliens. I never think about extraterrestrials. I don't study them, and I've never cared about them. I have to say this, when I feel like I'm dreaming and when I'm awake, it's easy for me to tell the difference. I wouldn't get confused. I felt like I was not dreaming. I felt like I was awake and aware the whole time. When I wake up, my arms are straight out from my body at a 90 degrees angle. My wrists are bound by some kind of clear plastic-like material. I don't know for sure if it's made of plastic, but it sure feels like it. It's still clear and see-through. I don't see any aliens, and I'm all by myself. I'd say the room is pretty small. Behind my head, I feel like I'm lying on some kind of gel-like material that's cold but not very hard. When that happens, I feel almost like I do after being put to sleep in the hospital. I often feel cold, too. I could feel a lot, but my head was just immobile. But the truth is that I wasn't really thinking straight. I do feel strange. I do feel sleepy, but I don't feel at all like I'm dreaming. Now comes the strange part. I've been lying there for minutes. It seems like real time never moves this fast in dreams. Always, something is going on. Then I hear a sound that sounds like the sound the door makes when it opens in the old version of the game Doom, except it's lower pitched and there's a sort of hum before it. At this point in time, aliens walked in. They moved quickly, so I didn't hear their steps. Maybe they don't move like we do. But I only think these things now that I've had time to think about what happened. The next thing I know, a twitchy alien is looking down at me, and he's moving really fast. Not just his movements, but it felt like his whole body was moving faster. Almost nothing can be said about it. I guess I should have known he was fast. Just not the way I thought it would be. The knowledge came to me in a way that made it seem like a fact, and the way it looked was almost like grace. How people talked about them. The eyes were big and round. Since then, I've read many stories about aliens, and some people say I wasn't scared of them. I was completely scared. I could see how its skin was textured, as if it were one of those fake pictures, but imagine it was right in front of you. One was looking right at me from above, but I knew there was at least one more because I could feel him touching my body. Now you know that if you see a fake alien somewhere, it moves funny and blinks too slowly for this guy to believe it. I could see, for example, that a living thing was moving in tiny ways. I could see things like the small muscles in its face. It never blinked, and I don't think its eyes had lids. The aliens who came here pretty quickly did something. I was just staring at this guy for a few seconds before they knocked me out. Here's what comes next. I usually get up around 7:30 in the morning. I woke up at noon. As far as I can remember, this has never happened to me before. Anyway, that's what happened in my dream, or, as I tell myself to feel normal, we appreciate you reading. And I'd love it if you had any questions, which I'll try to answer as best I can. I'm a man from Italy who is 27 years old. But 6 years ago, I moved to Argentina. I had a pretty normal life, and nothing out of the ordinary happened to me. The only things that can't be ignored are the times when I was a boy and heard a sexual voice whispering my name loudly at night. Other than that, I've always studied things like UFO encounters with aliens, mysteries in general, and even things about cults. I never did anything to get better. I just loved studying, and I still do, so I didn't have any specific goals. To get to the point, I'll tell you here what I wrote back then in my diary. First day of court is September 15th, 2015. I don't remember what time it was, but judging by the outside light, it was probably after 4 a.m. or almost 5 a.m. I'm dreaming. I'm in the plaza of the city where I was born, minding my own business. Suddenly, a boy in red and blue comes up to me with a map and asks for directions. He wants to know where to hide because someone wants to take him away. He seems upset, but he looks at me closely, almost as if he's waiting for a quick answer. I couldn't remember what I was going to say, but I knew that kidnapping was bad and shouldn't happen. Nobody should let it happen. As I'm talking to the child, I realize I'm in a dream, just like most people do at some point, when they realize they're just watching what's going on in their dreams and can wake up. When I realize this, I feel something in my mouth as the dream ends. It's like biting something meaty with a lot of force and holding it with my jaw. So I open my eyes when I wake up. I'm lying on my left side in my bed. There's an alien with a big head and a skinny body. It's not very tall, but I think it's somewhere between short and medium height. It looks a lot like a grey, but its skin is ashy and pink. His right arm is stretched out toward my blanket, and that's the limb. I'm biting the alien, whose face is in pain and whose black eyes are squeezed shut, and right after that scene I pass out. When I wake up in the morning, This is all I can remember. The 15th of December 2015 was the second case day. I don't remember what time it was in this case either, but since the number was similar to the first one, it was probably almost the same. I had a dream that I was in a large grassy field that I didn't know and that was surrounded by woods in the distance. I'm not alone, and it seems like a lot of people are following me. I yell at them and quickly point to the woods to my right, saying loudly that they can't stop the people who were running and that many will be saved. Oddly enough, I had a similar dream about being kidnapped and taken away in September. I start to realize that I'm in a dream and just watching this time. I'm even aware that if you woke me up, you'd find an alien next to my bed. I did feel a strange mix of danger and adrenaline at the same time. I thought it was September, so when I woke up and opened my eyes, I saw it behind me because I was sleeping on my left side. I turned my head a little to see part of his torso. It was almost defined and slim, with muscles that didn't look like those of a human, but the pale skin and redness of it made it stand out. When I saw it, I immediately squeezed my eyes shut. My body is shaking from the inside, as if I were a bunch of nerves and almost ready to freak out. I had a rush of adrenaline, but I tried to fight against it. I started to think about something that would make me feel better. I was thinking about the simple things I would have done if I had another day. I tried to ignore the alien behind me and calm my body down slowly. When I tried this, I felt a light touch on my hair and a radio effect in my right ear at the same time. It was like an interference on a radio with no channel. After a moment of being confused, I started to hear a voice that sounded bored and didn't have any sex. I didn't know the language, so I didn't understand anything. It was this voice talking, and there was radio noise in the background. On the other hand, I had a blackout. As usual, when I woke up in the morning, I could only think of this third case day, March 15, 2016. It was definitely night. But I couldn't open my eyes and look at the light coming in through my window. This time, it happened again, but in a less direct way. I don't remember everything about the dream, but I was with other people in a city next to a desert road. I don't remember why, but at some point, a few people were in charge of us. One of them was a policeman, and I don't know why, but when I saw him, I thought, "You're an alien in human form." The policeman looked at me with a wonderful look of surprise. Then, with a malicious grin, she sent me the same feeling I'd had in the past, a sense of danger and a strange feeling in my body, almost like a radar that tells me something is wrong nearby. I feel the same way I did the first time I talked to these beings. I don't remember anything else at the moment. Just as the dream was coming to an end, I passed out and never woke up. In the middle of the night, I don't know what happened. I can tell the difference between the real world and the world of dreams. This really did happen. If anyone has had similar things happen or has similar answers, please let me know. Smithfield, between 3 and 9 p.m. on June 20, 1992, my friend and I were finishing up a friendly-based tournament in Rhode Island. The Smith and Sales Reservoir was where we were. As the tournament came to an end, the fishing got better. So, I talked my friend into going out again around 11 p.m. for a bite to eat. We were fishing at the end of the peninsula, next to the water, where there was a dark, empty house. Even though it was very quiet, I thought a helicopter was landing in the cove behind the house, where we couldn't see it, but it didn't make any noise. I made a sign to my friend, but when the lights went out, we decided that a car must have come down the road and then turned around. We never saw a car, though. We kept fishing toward the shore, right in front of the house, and I saw what looked like a fish. Children playing with flashlights were running around frantically in one room of the house and looking out the windows. My fishing partner and I decided that people must have come home to the house even though we never saw a car or people, and the power must have been turned off in the house. Even though we never saw or heard anyone, we kept fishing, and almost right away, at the water's edge, there was a strangely tall human-shaped figure and a small, child-sized human-shaped figure. The taller one looked like it was holding a flashlight and searching for things like frogs. The strange thing was that they were shining almost like glow-in-the-dark lights. But we thought that was just weird light from the flashlights reflecting off the water. Just then, we saw about 15 to 20 glowing shapes on the beach facing us. They were all different sizes and shapes. We were scared because we hadn't heard a sound the whole time. We were close enough to hear people walking through the brush near the shore just as we were getting scared and thinking about leaving the flashlight. The first big figure that looked like a person was holding a light in the direction of our boat. My friend told me to start the car and let's leave. As I started to set the choke on the small 5-horsepower outboard motor and pull the cord, the flashlight floated across 30 to 40 yards of water while I was starting the motor and keeping half an eye on it. When the motor started and I put it in gear, I looked up and saw the light about 8 feet above our small boat. I never looked back, and it only took 3 minutes to get back to the boat ramp. We quickly put the boat in the van and were shocked when we got in. All the dogs were barking loudly in the lake. Before this, we had never heard a dog. My friend told me I couldn't say anything. I haven't done that until now. First, let me say that I have never been interested in aliens or UFOs. I've always been pretty scared of it all, to be honest. When I was 12, I remember seeing signs, and I was so scared for weeks. But until I saw something that I think most of you won't believe, I thought this was science fiction. That's all right. I'm sending my story here because I haven't told anyone about it and I just need to get it out there. I went camping with a friend in a very remote part of Northern California 3 months ago. I can't get enough of nature. I've been camping my whole life, and most of my free time was spent hiking, rock climbing, hunting, etc. A friend of mine who also likes being outside wanted to spend the weekend in the Sierras and asked me to go with him. We were sitting up by the fire on our second night. We did not stay at a campground. From where we parked, we hiked about 10 miles to a clearing with a beautiful view. He had been there before. We had some food around 10 p.m., and now we're just looking at the stars. He was tired, so he went to his tent to sleep. I didn't want to go to sleep. And about 45 minutes after he went to bed, I saw this thing coming up from the valley below. It was in the shape of a basic flying saucer, and the lights around the edges were round and changed color over and over again. I couldn't believe it. After maybe 15 seconds of looking at it, I decided I had to wake him up so he could see it and not think I was crazy. I stood up, and when I turned around to look at it again, it was gone. I called out his name, and that's when things started to go really wrong. When I was called, I didn't hear my own voice. Nothing could be heard at all. My eyes could move around, but my body couldn't. I can remember seeing that the fire had turned into ice. As if time had stopped, everything looked like a picture. Then I saw a flash of light and lost consciousness. I woke up later when the sun was just starting to come up. I was outside, shivering in the dirt next to a fire that had been out for a long time. I felt like I had been drugged totally in this haze. I called his name slowly a few times, and he finally came out of the tent. He was, to say the least, very confused. I tried to tell them what had happened, but my memory was so fuzzy that I couldn't. We left in 30 minutes, and on the 7-hour drive back, I fell asleep and woke up several times. When he dropped me off at my house, I fell asleep for almost a whole day. A few weeks later, I was messing around with an amp, and when I unplugged my guitar, the static ooh sound came out. I remembered everything because the sound made me think of it for some reason. When I was able to think again, I was hanging sideways in this circular machine in a position that looked a lot like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man. Clear glass restraints that looked like shackles were holding me in place, and 3 typical greys were standing above me. They were about 4 feet tall and wore white spandex-like suits. One of them was taking blood from a vein under my armpit with a strange-looking syringe while the other stood there and watched. I could tell they were surprised when I woke up, even though they didn't really show it. Except for my eyes and lips, I couldn't move at all. I was also scared, and the rush of adrenaline made my heart pound like it was in fight or flight mode. I was so scared I couldn't even begin to tell you, but I was also very angry. I thought about killing them. I wanted to rip this thing out of their hands and kill them. My mind went completely animalistic, and I could tell they could all feel my anger because they all moved back at the same time. I'm 6 feet 3.5 inches tall, and I wanted to look as scary as possible. This was silly, since I was paralyzed and therefore completely harmless. I couldn't see 2 of them anymore, so I guess they left the room. The other one was just staring at me, void of any emotion. I really wanted to just close my eyes, but I forced myself to look back at it and try not to blink. The 2 greys then came back, so they were no longer alone. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw 2 tall people who looked very human standing behind them. A man and a woman who seemed to be Norse gods. Both of them had golden hair and big, round eyes. Males were dark blue, while females were purple. I think they were what people in the UF community call Nordics. I thought this was very strange. My family descended from Sweden and I am very Nordic looking, blonde hair, blue eyes, the works. I know this sounds like a cliché, but I heard a woman's voice in my head. For some reason, I couldn't understand what she was saying, even though she wasn't speaking English. It's hard to explain, but I think she told me to calm down because I wasn't in danger. I took a deep breath and asked what they wanted with me. She said they were just making sure I was okay. When I heard that, I almost passed out. I asked her what she meant. She told me that I was saved by them. When I was first created, I knew exactly what she was talking about as soon as she said it. I came into the world almost 2 months early. During labor, my mom was very sick. We both had 104-degree fevers. Strangely, the doctors had no idea what was wrong with us, so they did 2 spinal taps on us. My mother was given 3, and I stayed in that ICU bubble thing for 4 nights. There was a decent chance I was going to die. Then one day I started to feel better, and I got better all the way. The doctors were very worried that the whole ordeal might have permanently damaged my body and possibly my brain, but I was totally fine. I asked her why she was looking out for me this time. I heard a deep male voice say that this is something to talk about at a different time. I asked him if they were people, and he said no, which surprised me because they look like people. I asked him if they were where people came from. He said yes, that they had come here 200,000 years ago and created mankind by combining their DNA with that of our primate ancestors. I wanted to know why they looked so much like me and not like other people. He said that many of their males found human women attractive and had children with them. This gave the people of the North some of their physical traits. I wanted to know more, but they declined and said it was time for me to go back. I passed out right away and woke up with my clothes on and shivering next to a dead campfire. I know this sounds completely crazy and impossible, but it really did happen. I don't know what to do. I haven't known what to do since the meeting, but sending in my story already makes me feel a little better. Feel free to ask any questions and I will answer them to the best of my ability. Since this happened, I've been looking into a lot of theories about how aliens and people are linked, and I'd like to talk about it. I won't fill any memories with the usual nonsense I see or read about, and there won't be any anal probing, exam tables, or bright lights sucking me up into flying saucers. Those things simply did not take place. At least that I can remember throughout these memories. I'll use the word bang to describe a sudden loss of consciousness that can't be stopped. This is how it seemed. Anyways, Bang was 3 or 4 years old in 1972 or 1973. My memories of things that happened when I was this age are very vague and lack many details. But even now, over 40 years later, I still remember some things very clearly. Not all of these things have to happen in order. I know this age range is right because I lived in a small town in the mountains until I was 5, when my family moved to a new house in the city. I often had dreams, or at least I think they were dreams, of 4 or 5 people standing close together at the end of my bed. I remember that their heights were very different and that they always stood still, with the shortest one in front, like a family waiting for the photographer to take the picture. I never saw their faces, and I don't remember what they were wearing or if they were even wearing clothes. I stared at them, and they stared back. These dreams always ended with a loud sound like the crash of something breaking, forcing me to look away and toward the noise, only to instantly wake up in the morning. The night I was always frightened of the people in the hallway. I can't say anything else about this. I was only 3 or 4 years old, so this could have easily been a regular monster. Fear as a child. I do clearly remember one night desperately trying to wake up my older brother. I was screaming at him to help and to wake up, shaking his arm and shoulder. I tried to wake him up as hard as a 4-year-old could, but he just wouldn't. I was crying in the hallway, where the light was on, and I was wearing yellow one-piece pajamas that were old and dirty. They had one long zipper that went from the neck to my left ankle, and the soles were made of cheap plastic. How come I remember what I wore? I don't know, but I remember it very well. My parents came out and used the cliché to make me feel better. It was all in my head. Now go back to bed. This final memory from this age may not be related, but it's very clear and it stuck with me. I was playing in the living room under my dad's wooden desk. I don't know what time it was, but it was during the day for sure. I can't say for sure what I was playing or doing. But I was having the time of my life, as any 4-year-old should. While under a desk across the room. And I could see, from where I was sitting at a desk, a life-size carving of an owl standing on a tree stump. My mom decorated the house with a lot of our figurines and other items. I looked at it and it turned its head towards me. That's all I can remember of it. What? Why would I have this vivid memory? Was it a true hallucination or just a highly active imagination of a child ages 5 to 14, 1974 to 1983? These memories are just as vague but clearly different from my earlier memories. I began to see more detail, and most of the time I was awake and sometimes not even in bed again. These may not have been in chronological order, but I'll do my best. My family is now living in a nice middle-class home in a major city. My brother and I still shared a room, but that was fine by me. He was my big brother after all, very big. In fact, as he is 13 years older than me. He was usually nice to me and treated me well. But because of our huge age difference, we never bonded quite the same as brothers and sisters should. I still looked up to him no matter what. The dreams of the people at the end of my bed continue exactly the same over and over for years. Not nightly, but often enough that I would become fearful of sleeping when I was in school first grade. I believe we were tasked with drawing something that we were most frightened of. I drew myself laying in bed with a face looking in my window. This drawing was your typical stick figure drawing. Only a 5-year-old could muster. I don't have to describe what the face in the window looked like. I don't remember any incident or event that caused me to draw it. I just drew it like everyone else did. I brought all of my schoolwork home and went over it with my mom. As expected, she didn't seem very interested in most of it, but she pretended to be. So I look like I care about first grade schoolwork. That's good, honey. I didn't know at first that my mom had kept that drawing for a long time. She didn't keep any other pieces of art or work I would take with me. I remember seeing it many times in the desk or filing cabinet over the years, even when I was in my late teens. It just disappeared. I never found out if she threw it away or just got better at hitting it. I did ask her a few times about the drawing, and it was strange that she always remembered it, but she always said she didn't know where it was and changed the subject. My father was very angry that my brother joined the army. The war in Vietnam. Even though the war was almost over, my father's generation still thought about it. I think my dad was so mad because he had been in the army and knew what it was like to go to war. He was afraid of losing a son. I didn't know what was happening until the next day. My brother packed up his things and left, leaving me alone in my room for the first time in my life. My parents had a small gathering of their friends to play pinochle, and have some drinks and laughs. Even though these gatherings didn't happen very often, it wasn't unusual for them to spill out into the backyard. No one in my family smokes, but a few of my dad's friends did. Late at night, I would take the chance to run around the backyard. The cool, wet grass felt great when I walked on it. I pretty much played hide and seek by myself. I would run and hide behind a bush or tree. I would stand there for a moment and laugh, then run to the next great place. I was easily entertained, and I still am. One big bush was a good place to hang out because it was just out of reach of the porch light but close enough that I could hear my dad and his friends talking and laughing. I stood behind that bush and looked into its branches and leaves. Then, from about a foot away, a face turned and looked back at me. Yes, that's the one. I don't remember ever seeing that face in such clear detail before. Those eyes were so dark and deep, without any shine or reflection. I couldn't see any eyelids on her eyes. The head is a little bit taller and thinner than I've seen before. Most people like to draw. I can't think of anything else about the mouth, nose, or ears. Those eyes, though. I screamed and ran to the front porch, where I started crying. When I told my father about the face, he laughed and, just to be funny, took a flashlight and went to look in the bush. He laughed even harder and told me to come look. I was scared, but I put my trust in him. It looked like a caterpillar. No, I was so afraid of the dark and of going to sleep that I was sick for years. I was so emotionally drained every day that I couldn't make friends and only had one. I was picked on, or even tortured, every day in school when I was in elementary school. From 3rd grade until 8th grade, I was tripped, kicked, pushed, knocked down, books thrown, personal items stolen or broken, hair pulled, ears flicked, kicked in the balls, stabbed with pencils, and verbally abused all day. I'm sure I forgot most of it. I try as hard as I can to forget this time. I try to ask my teachers and parents for help, but I've always been told not to fight, and to give the other cheek. Even if I had wanted to, I wouldn't have been able to defend myself. I just didn't have the energy or motivation to do it because I couldn't sleep well. At this point in my life, I was crying myself to sleep most nights, as quietly as possible, into my pillow. Everything was my fault, and I didn't want to ask any questions, so I just wanted to be quiet. I told myself that I got interested in electronics, computers, and any other kind of technology. I would break apart old radios, TVs, and just about anything else I could get my hands on. I would even unsolder all of the electronic parts from the boards in the hopes that I could use the parts again in my own designs. One night, after using a cheap soldering iron from Radio Shack to burn my fingers and break parts, I went to bed. I headed for bed. Someone or something woke me up. I was jolted awake, and I heard someone say, "It's hot." The voice was monotone and deep. Not robot-like, but also not normal. Imagine Freeman saying Morgan with no emotion and a straight face. "It's warm." I could feel the fear making my heart beat faster. What? Who? Who? I jumped out of bed and ran to my desk, where the soldering iron was lying on the floor, so I could unplug it. How did it get there? I remember putting it on the stand. I turned it off, put it back in the stand, and started to cry. The spot where the soldering iron burned through the carpet was a huge hole. Damn it! For months, I couldn't use a soldering iron. One night, my dad was very upset that I kept my room light on all night. He told me I couldn't have it on after bedtime. I was too embarrassed to ask for a nightlight. I did the next best thing, which was to wire an old toggle switch into the power cord of my floor lamp. This was so I could keep the light off until I couldn't take it anymore and had to turn it on for a quick look. Every night, with my thumb on the toggle, I held that power switch very tightly in my hand. Just holding out as a side note, this is very dangerous because I spent the whole night holding the main line in my hand with nothing but a wad of electrical tape wrapped around it. This is wrong. Not too long after I put in a remote light switch, which I thought was a great idea. I fell asleep holding it tightly, and when I woke up in the middle of the night, there was a small person standing next to my bed to my right. If you compare the height of my mattress to the height of the person, they are about 4 feet tall. It looked like a human, with 2 arms, a torso, and a head. I could only tell that it was dark and that there was a silhouette. Where is that knob? I dropped it in my sleep. Have a look down. I saw it on the bed next to me, so I grabbed it, put my thumb on the toggle, and it went off. The next morning, I woke up. Nothing was wrong with the switch, and I wasn't shocked. I used that switch for a few more years after that. I had nosebleeds often for about a year, maybe once or twice a month when nothing was wrong. I think it was 12 or 13 years old. At this point, everyone was saying iron deficiency. My friend would laugh at me and try to help me stop them by telling me to do silly things like put a penny under my tongue. In the end, they stopped on their own, said. I have no idea what happened, but I remember it. After this, not much went on. It was the same dream over and over again. By the time I was 15, I was almost used to them and almost expected them. This was from 1984 to 1987. Teenage years. In general, the first few years of high school were fine. Bullying had died down to verbal insults, and it wasn't even happening every day. By this time, I was sleeping a little better, so I felt healthier and happier overall. By the time I was a sophomore, I had made a few friends and felt like things were getting back on track. In my junior year, I met a girl. Yes, she is a real girl. This was the best stretch of time I've ever had. At the time, we did typical high school date things like watch TV, go to the movies, and go to the mall. She had trouble controlling her anger, though, and I think she was mentally better prepared for life than I was. I loved her with all my heart because she was perfect. I still think of her sometimes and smile. 1987. The store. My girlfriend and I were walking down the public path in the center. In this shopping center that is mostly indoors. I just stood there, frozen with fear. My body started to shake, my heart was pounding in my chest and ears, and tears started to fall down my face. I forgot about the best mall in the world. I was looking at something else. In the window of a nearby bookstore, there was a book that stood out. The book scared me more than anything else I've ever seen. No, that book cover looks familiar. Where? Yes, I remember that I've seen that person standing at the end of my bed and looking at me through the window from the bushes next to my bed. Whitley Strieber's Communion was the name of the book. I'm not going to look for it, but if you want to see the original cover of that book, you can look it up on Google. It's not the same as what I saw exactly, but it's close. I'd never seen that face before anywhere else. My girlfriend knew a little bit about my past, but she didn't know how scared I would be to see that face again. She began dragging me away. Thank you. I could no longer stand to look at it. I couldn't move because I was frozen. I must have looked so stupid as I stood in the mall looking at a book and crying my eyes out while my girlfriend pulled on my arm and said, "Let's go, let's go." I was slowly getting worse again. Even after all these years, I still had dreams, but they were so easy to forget. Now, they are the first thing I think about when I wake up. Every time I happen to see that face by accident. All those years' worth of memories rushed back to me. Every dream. The face in the bush, getting picked on, and crying myself to sleep for years. Damn it. That book is awful. That face is awful. I felt so good. Age, 46, from 1991 to 2015, I again lost myself and my girlfriend. I went through years of my life avoiding people and anything social. By some miracle, I did find another girl who seemed to like me, and I ended up having 2 kids with her. In general, everything was fine. A few strange dreams that are too vague to remember. I still have a fear of the dark, but I've learned to deal with it. I finally broke up with the mother of my children, and when I was 36, I joined the army. At 36, that's not an easy thing to do, but I did it for 4 years. That was enough to cross it off my bucket list. I got a cat from my aunt, and I really liked having her around. She was a good lap cat who always came running when I called her name to get pets and treats. He is 40 years old and has the best of everything. A nightlight that saves energy, and has a lot of features. Yes. I got one at 47 in 2016. Last year, this happened, and I remember it being like watching a Blu-ray movie on a 4K monitor with 7.1 surround sound. Most likely, this will be my last entry with a lot of detail because I remember it so well. I haven't had those dreams in a long time. I had to talk about peace for 15 years. Still, I'm afraid of the dark, so my bed is in the farthest corner of the room. For me to feel safe, I need those two walls. Most of the time, I sleep with my head against one wall and my body against the other. I also need a big bed that puts space between me and the rest of the room at night, like a bravely shining wall that protects me. I sometimes flop around on the bed and change positions often when I'm watching a show or movie on TV. This is because I have a bad back. When I'm done watching, I always go back to the corner and cover up to go to sleep. One night, I was watching TV while lying on my back with my head out in the room. I wasn't thinking about it, and I had forgotten how awful it makes me feel to be so open. I fell asleep in the prone position, on my stomach. I was only half awake when I felt someone pull at my hair. "Quit it." I told my cat that. I thought my cat was just poking at me and licking my hair. She did spend a lot of time messing around. "Stop." I put out my hand to push her away. "Hold on, that's not right. It feels like skin." I touched the arm for a moment and was sure that it was skin. So soft, but tight and firm on the thin arm. I looked into the sky. It was again standing there with one arm in my hand. I looked at the face for a while, but I couldn't make out any details. I could only make out the shape of the head. It was like watching a show where the people's faces are blurred out to protect their privacy. I tried to finish waking up and focus on the face for what seemed like a long time. Then I thought, am I trying to see this? I'd rather not see. It moved away, so you can go back to sleep. At least, these were my thoughts. I believe so. So I slowly turned away, put my head down, and closed my eyes. I could feel a weird buzzing all over my body. Please don't make me say it again. Bang! The next morning, I woke up. This event was imprinted on my mind with such clarity and detail that I almost felt like it was still happening. I got scared and looked around the room, which was now bright with morning light. It was over after a month, when my cat started having trouble breathing and having seizures while she slept. Why does this keep happening to my little cat? Is there a link? Did that jerk hurt her in some way? She fought it for almost 2 months. When she couldn't fight anymore, she died while struggling to breathe. In her last days, I always comforted her and gave her treats and bottles of water. She loved drinking water straight from the cap of a bottle. Damn. I long for that cat. But now I'm alone in my room.